I literally woke up on fire. We have the technology to prevent these things, but we're not requiring them in some cases. There's not an awareness about them in many cases.
When we think about burn injuries, we think of the physical pain of it. And that's really honestly all I ever thought about. Like, the physical pain of it, but there's social and emotional, aspects of it as well for these kids.
The first question that a kid wants to ask you is not, you want to play on the playground? It's, what happened to you? And that's, as a kid, that's really hard.
The technology that we have, right? The products and the services that we provide that can make a real difference, can save lives, can save kids from some of these just terrible experiences and these injuries. Good morning and welcome to Coffee Break with Jake. I'm so glad that you're here. For those of you that are on the call every week, we're glad to have you back. If you haven't been on the call before, we have Coffee Break with Jake every week at 11 a.m. And the purpose of the call is to bring together security and life safety industry professionals to share best practices, challenges, and in this case, an opportunity for impact. And I'm really excited to be joined here today by Rebekah Johnson. Rebekah is co-founder and executive director of Embers of Hope and a burn survivor. She also serves as executive director for the Florida Fire Sprinkler Association and regional coordinator for Florida and Puerto Rico with the International Fire Sprinkler Association. Just a quick heads up, we are going to talk about residential fire and recovery, and some of the subject matter may be a little bit heavy, but there's purpose here, and I'm really excited to talk to Rebekah about her story, about all the incredible things that she's doing, and about how all of you can help us have an impact with her organization. So, Rebekah, why don't we just why don't we just go back to the story that kind of like overwhelmed everybody in attendance at the Integration Association of Florida event just a couple of years ago. Take us back to your story and tell us about that night that changed everything for you.
Sure. Thanks, Jake. And thanks to everyone for just being here and allowing me to talk about something that's so important to me and really to all of us being in life safety. So thank you. So in 2002, May, it's coming around here now. So it'll be, I guess, 24 years. I literally woke up on fire. And I think what happened and what they think happened was that an electrical spark from the outlet behind my headboard set my mattress on fire, setting me on fire. I think no one expects that, but I just woke up and the first thing I remember was the whole stop, drop, and roll. So I ran out the front door and I rolled in the grass. After I was out, I thought about my roommates. I lived with three guys that I was working with at the time, in an old home that we rented that was probably built in the 1980s. So I ran back inside, and two of my roommates had already gone to work, and my last roommate was in the last bedroom. He was still asleep, and as the smoke in the home was filling up everywhere, I just screamed at him and said, "Sean, the house is on fire. Get up, get up." And I think there was probably a moment where he thought I was kidding until he realized there's smoke everywhere. So him being woken up that way, he had the good sense to climb out of the bathroom in his bedroom. He was in the master bedroom in the back. And for me, I had already come through the house. And so in my mind, I had escaped through the front door. So I ran back through the house, out the front door, and we met in the driveway. We sat there, and the flames started really just kind of engulfing our home. And I just remembered, oh my goodness, our pets are inside. So I ran back inside, and Wendy, Sean's golden retriever, was just sitting there in the recessed living room. It was filling up with smoke, and I mean, I think she might have been in shock. And I tried to pick her up, but I was too hurt to be able to do that. And so I started looking for my cats. At that point, I couldn't find them, and really the smoke was so dense. I know people say this a lot, but I think until you experience it, you really just have no idea. The smoke was so dense that I just couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. I started tripping over the furniture in my own home, started to get very lost. And by honestly, I really don't know how I did, but I saw a crack of light coming through the front door where I had escaped before. And I don't think I said it out loud, but I just thought to myself, I've got to leave my pets behind. I said goodbye and ran outside.
When you talk about this and you talk about the reaction for, kind of your reaction in that moment, what do you think? What do you want people to understand about like how we act in that moment and that kind of chaos? And what should they take away from just the difference of actually being in it versus planning for it?
Yeah, this is something I think about myself in my own circumstance, but it's also something that I tell families when I'm, mentoring them in the hospital when they're walking through something similar. And, no one will understand what it's like to be in there. And so it's important that survivors know they don't necessarily have to justify their choices. But, it's a question. It's why would you go back in or why would you put yourself in harm's way? And really, in those moments, there's not a lot of rational thinking that happens. It's honestly just reactionary. There's not a lot of time. I mean, especially in our homes, I think being in the industry that we're in, we know that it's seconds, minutes for us to get out. And there's not a lot of debating that goes on. It's just immediate action. And so I think I would just want people to know that when you don't have a plan, you don't know what to do. So you do the first thing that comes to mind. And like I said, that's what, stop, drop, and roll. I had heard that as a kid. So to me, that was the right thing to do. I was on fire, which I know definitely helped me because I was put out the first time. I didn't go running around and that, but I think it makes me know that plans are so important and technologies that can protect us and give us time are so important to be able to make better decisions.
So once you got outside, what do you remember about the folks that helped you? When did it kind of kick in? How seriously you were injured?
Yeah, really, even after I got out, my biggest thing was our pets, just someone coming to, get our pets out. And when the fire department came on scene, my clothes had burned off in the fire, and two little boys that lived in our neighborhood had brought me a sheet. And so I was kind of covered with a sheet standing next to my roommate that was home, Sean. And, so when they came up, they didn't really even know how hurt I was, so they just kind of started making sure that the fire didn't spread to other homes in our neighborhood, and I just kept, really honestly screaming at them, begging them to go back and get our pets because I failed to do that, but, as soon as they came over to kind of say, "Is anyone hurt?" My roommate said, "I think she's hurt," because I was completely black. It wasn't that you could see wounds. I was covered in smoke and ash really. And, as soon as they, like, lifted up the sheet, that's really when the air hit me. I know, "Oh my goodness, I'm hurt, and I'm hurt bad."
Talk to us about the weeks that followed.
As soon as I realized how hurt I was, they, put me in the ambulance, and, I don't know this, but I was told I coded on the way to the hospital. My airway was closing, and, they were able to bring me back, and I was treated here. I live in Gainesville, so I was treated at Shands Burn Unit, and, you don't really remember much about the first weeks of recovery because 'cause you're in and out of surgery and you're medically sedated, but you have a lot of hallucinations and nightmares. But when you finally come to, you're really I was wrapped from head to toe. I couldn't see any part of my body, and, my hair was all cut off. I had long hair, and it was more just trying to think about, 1, the processing of what happened, right? And then you're thinking, what does life look like now? Like, am I ever gonna get out of this hospital bed? Ever gonna be able to walk? Both my arms were burned, so, as far as using my arms, I had a feeding tube and was intubated. So it was really scary. But I think, the medical team there was so caring, and I had such an outpouring of support of family and friends. I really just tried to take one day at a time, but it was just kind of surgery after surgery. The worst part was the cleaning after the surgeries. The bringing in, it's gotten a lot better, but back then you basically were put on a steel table, naked, You were rolled into a room, and there were curtains in between the other showers, and the shower came atop, and basically you had a team of people working on you, trying to remove staples, scrubbing. Really, the most painful thing I've ever experienced in my life, and that was probably the worst part of the recovery process, aside from the uncertainty. Certainly, the physically worst of it. That was every day.
First of all, thank you for sharing, what happened that night and the recovery after. I wanna kinda shift to everybody's thinking about, "Oh my gosh, how horrible this experience was for you." And a lot of people, faced with such a traumatic experience, I don't know that they start thinking about other people and about how this can have a purpose. And so, when did you realize that, what happened to you and your story could become a mission to support other survivors?
I've always had a pretty positive outlook my whole life. And I think I'm a doer. And so sitting in the hospital bed, not being able to do anything was really so hard. And one day, one of the nurses came in and said that there was another female admitted. She was really having a hard time, and I was close to the end of where I was going to be discharged. I knew I was going to be alive. I was going to be able to live with a few of my friends until I got back on my feet that way. And she said that she was really struggling, and would I maybe go over there and talk to her? And I said, sure. So I hobbled over there, across to the other side of the burn unit. And she was, about my age, and she had been burned. She dropped a fondue pot, and the grease lit into a fire and burned her. And she was just devastated. And I just talked to her, just honestly just said, I know how you're feeling. And I was there, but now I'm walking around, and there is the other side of this. And I think when I left, we both felt a little better. And as I walked back to the other side of the unit to get back in our bed, I thought, okay, there's something here. There's something positive here because of how it made me feel and how I believe it made her feel. And I thought, okay, this is the worst thing that's ever happened in my life, but is there something good that can come out of it? And that really was that first spark of hope.
Early on, what was I know, we arrived at along the road, the burn camp for kids, but I know that you've also played a role in kind of advocating for some changes with legislation, things like that, and standards. Can you speak to a little bit about that and why that's so important to you?
Sure, I never want anyone to experience what I went through. And I did get connected with kids through volunteering, and I still am connected with kids, as you know. But the advocacy part is me having a voice. It gives me a voice, which helps me on my recovery. But what it does is it makes a difference, and hopefully it prevents people having to go through what I did. So my advocacy that I did with the electrical codes and the art fall protectors, requiring those in new construction, and also talking to your group and talking about smoke detectors and fire sprinklers. We have the technology to prevent these things, but we're not requiring them in some cases. There's not an awareness about them in many cases. And so I think that's really just where my survivor voice kicks in is, if I never have to go to the hospital again and see a family that's devastated by fire, that would be a really good thing. And so anything that I can do to impact change on the state level, the local level, national level, I'm there for sure.
Awesome. That's so awesome. At what point did you realize you could help kids? Talk to me about that. Where did your incredible passion for helping these children who survived burn injuries, where did that come from?
I had no idea burns existed, right, until I was burned.
Sure.
And before I left the hospital, someone told me about a camp that was for children that were burned and asked if maybe I'd want to go. And I said, maybe. And then one of my physical therapists said, if you go, I'll go. And I was like, okay. So I went, and I mean, I saw all these kiddos that were overcoming similar injuries to my own, and I was just so lucky and I felt so good to be alive and to be with these kids and to model for them what recovery could look like for them, that you didn't have to walk around and be ashamed of your scars. And so I did that for many years, and not only was it, camps really were meant to be a fun place to kind of escape your burn. When I went as a survivor, most of the counselors were firefighters, and so when I went, one of the president there said, "Hey, I think you'd be great to talk to these kids," and I said, "Sure." So I went in, just started talking about what life looked like for us, and how to manage that. And so we were able to start a support group while at camp, which became a mainstay for that camp. Not only that camp, but other camps that are around the state. And I think that was wonderful, right? That was one step in the right direction. But I thought there's no camp in our area and there's so much more we can do at camp to help healing and recovery. And so my husband's a firefighter in Florida as well. And we just decided, you know what? Let's see what we can do and take this on. And that's kind of when we opened our camp for kids.
And so talk to me about what is like, I'm a parent hearing about it for the first time, how would you describe, Embers of Hope camp?
Sure. So I was actually at the burn unit all day yesterday, or actually Wednesday. And sadly, I met with about 8 kiddos. And so I did that, on Wednesday. But what this is an opportunity for the kids to be kids and not have to worry about what they're walking around. Burns are very obvious. They're an outside scar that everybody can see. You could try and hide it with a hoodie, but most likely, you know, people are going to see it. You can't hide from them. And so at camp, what this does is it allows these kids to be kids. And not only that, but see the other people that survived. I remember how much it helped me to meet somebody else who survived a fire and ended up, being okay. And it's just that shared experience. It's so encouraging and it just bridges with their own resilience that I think most kids innately have to say, it's okay. And you're amazing and you're awesome. And this is not going to stop you from doing whatever you want to do. And when you have other kids that you're connecting with, it just makes it believable. And I think that's really what I try to tell parents is this was a traumatic experience. There's no escaping that. But having connection, having support, being able to talk with other survivors, it makes such a difference for kids in their recovery.
When we think about burn injuries, we think of the physical pain of it, right? But and that's really honestly all I ever thought about, like, the physical pain of it and, and how incredible how much that must hurt, right? But there's social and emotional, aspects of it as well for these kids, and so help us to understand that, like, let's talk about loneliness with them. What's it like for them when they go back to school? Because I think that's gonna help folks understand. Again, we're gonna come back to the camp, but I really want everybody to understand what life is like for these kids aside from their injuries. What does that loneliness look like for them?
Sure, it is a burn injury is very isolating. Because there is a physical difference, not just with scars, but also sometimes with amputations. You go back to school and you're in a school of 400 kids and you're the one kid that looks like you do. The first question that a kid wants to ask you is not you want to play on the playground, it's what happened to you? And that's as a kid, that's really hard. They just as a kid, you just wanna fit in and you wanna make friends. And so a lot of times, especially, when kids don't have a good support system at home, they don't have that confidence where they can just accept who they are, which makes it not want to be put themselves out there to be accepted by others. And that becomes very isolating. Not only that, people think about that initial injury, Jake, like you did, the pain. But when kids are growing, grafted skin like I have on my arms, they don't grow like normal skin. There's not really a lot of elasticity. So as these kids grow, they're actually going to be going back and getting more revisions, more surgeries, usually until they stop growing, depending on the significance of their burns. So not only that, so say you're in first grade, you're burned. You're not going to probably go back until second grade. If you do, a lot of parents choose to homeschool because of the fear of this, which further isolates kids. But if they go back, then the next year they're gone for, 4 months, or they're coming back in bandages. I mean, you remember one of my campers, he said that and it was Camino cooties. That's what everybody would say because they thought, "Oh, if you touch him, you're gonna get it." It makes kids wanna retreat and just it's a lonely journey if you don't have support systems in place.
How do you help kids? How do you guys help them build confidence? And what messaging do you, kind of offer to them? How are you, how does Embers of Hope help them feel a little bit more like they have a place in this world? And how do they build that confidence?
A lot of times, just seeing me walk around and not hiding my burns, we'll have a lot of campers that show up and they're in a hoodie and jeans or sweatpants. And it's a summer camp, and it's Florida, and it's 85 degrees. And then all of a sudden, it's time to go to the pool or time to go to the water, and it's like, you just see this, like, mortified look on these kids' faces until they're like, "Oh, wait, they have scars too." Rebecca's got scars, she's not trying to hide them, and it kinda gives them a little confidence. And then the other portion of that is, like you said, it's this, emotional support. And so we have a support group where it's just me with the other only people that have survived a burn injury. And we just have an open floor to talk about life. And what happens is you have a kid maybe that was burned 6 years ago versus a kid who was burned 8 months ago. And you see how they start talking to each other. This little 5-year-old boy will say, "I'm just so tired of sitting by myself at lunch. No one will sit with me." And then you have this other child, who is now, 12, right? And he's had to deal with that. And he can kind of say, "Listen, I know, but you know what? You are going to make some friends. You just got to get out there and just have that." And I think that is no other person can tell them that. Their parents can't tell them that. But another kid who's been through it, they listen and they hear and they're like, "You know what? Maybe I'll try that when I go back to school." And I think it is confidence building, especially when you see some of the kids that are working on their self-acceptance or further along in their recovery or their journey to healing. And I like to think that I'm a good example of that too. I mean, I'm married, I have 2 kids. I mean, my burns have not stopped me from doing anything I wanted to do. In fact, it propelled me in a lot of ways to do things I probably never would. So, it's just it is an amazing space to be able to offer this for the kids.
For all of us that might interact with a kid with burn injuries, any advice? Are there things that sometimes adults, we know kids can be mean and bully kids, whether you have burn injuries or not. Being a kid seems to be so hard, right? But exponentially more so, certainly when you've got burns. What advice would you give to adults, in terms of, what things maybe they say that they shouldn't, that just don't land the right way? Or what advice could we give our kids when they might, whether it's somebody that's, got burns or a disability or whatever it might be, what's some advice that you would give us, in communicating with somebody that may be a little bit different?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. I think seeing the kid beyond the physical scars, the outward appearance, and just remembering that they're kids just on the inside, just like your kids. And I think, sometimes when we see things that are different from what we've experienced, it can be shocking, especially, I mean, burns can be challenging to look past. I understand that as someone who walks around with scars. But I think that's probably the first step is just recognizing they're more than just a burn survivor, they're also a kid. And I think one thing that we can also just do is while you might be curious about the story, maybe that's not your first question.
I don't think any
Yeah.
of us would walk up to somebody we've just met for the first time, be like, "Hey, can you tell me about the most traumatic experience of your life?" Like, would you like, "I've never met you, but can we talk about that?" But it seems okay when somebody's got scars, you know?
Yeah, yeah, you'd be surprised. I mean, I get asked I live in Gainesville, which is kinda small, so I think people are kinda used to seeing me around, but, oh my goodness, when I travel for work, I mean, I get asked pretty much everywhere I go, like, sometimes it's, "What happened to you?" Or I think I had was telling, Michael this, like, a few months ago. I was in the grocery store, and I was wearing a tank top, and this little four-year-old goes, "Mommy, ew, oh my goodness, what is wrong with her?" I mean, you get that, so I think there's ownership on both sides, right? The people that are burned and the people that aren't, and I think it's just always looking at someone as a person before anything, and that would apply to any kind of, disability or any difference that we see, right? We all just wanna be people. One of the common things I think that parents of children that have gone through this is, they're going through something too. And a lot of times, what they don't want to do is just forget it. I'll have parents call me and say, Rylan, just every time he says something, all he wants to do is talk about it. And I think understanding that sometimes that's how people process things and just allowing kids to kind of revisit it. And then it's okay if they have a different story than you do. In the hospital, I was visiting a family and their house burned down and one of their sons, was burned. The perspective of what happened is very different across the family, and that's okay. As we talked earlier in this conversation, no one can predict anything like that, and you're reacting in a way that you feel is best in the moment, and to judge that is really kinda unfair. So, I think just letting people have their story, and then offering support.
One of the things that we talked about that honestly took just I never thought of it. Honestly, I think this is one of the most important aspects of meeting different people with different experiences is just reframing how you look at the world and understanding, people's own individual experiences. But you mentioned something to me on during a prior conversation about some of the challenges that these kids are facing outside of really just outside of their injuries and even their loneliness, but some real challenges at home. And you told me one particular story about that little boy that you had lunch with back in, I think, December. Could you talk to us about could you talk to us about some of the challenges that these kids and these families face as they're going through recovery and after their injury, aside from just the emotional and physical aspects of it?
Sure. Yeah. With that one individual and with so many kids, and I think you all would probably agree to this being in your industry, is that a lot of these injuries happen in low income homes and with low income families because they don't have safe living spaces. And, if you think about Shands treats children from all over the Southeast. So if you're in Tallahassee and you have three other kids, it's really hard and you have a job to come down and see your kid and sit with them the entire time in the burn unit. So there's a lot of isolation there. But then when they go back home, they don't have anyone really that can care for them. And burns require a lot of care even at home. But there's a lot of food insecurity and there's a lot of fear. If you were in a home and, there was a house fire and you end up, going, or it was like a modular home, and then you go back into one, there's just so much emotional fear because they don't feel safe. So you're dealing with that. You're dealing with the social aspect, right? You're wanting to isolate. You're in pain and you don't know what your new normal is going to be either. So it's really compounded. It's a lot. And even long term, like the little boy that I went to, I mean, I went and bought him groceries at Walmart. I asked mom if it was okay. And of course she was like thankful. And one of the things I bought them was I bought them like all the staples, but it was around Christmas. So I bought them the little cookie kit making. They were so excited, like him and his siblings to see that. They always wanted it in the store, but it was too expensive. And the mom sent me a picture of them making the cookies. And, I didn't go in the home because a lot of times they're embarrassed, and they don't want me in the home. But what she sent me was her and 3 kiddos on a piece of plywood on 2 cinder blocks and then sitting on the floor. And that was where they ate dinner. Growing up like that is hard for anybody, but you have the other things that they're going through. It's heartbreaking. and it's the situation for many of these kids.
Yeah. So, sorry, you always do this to me, Rebecca. Every time we talk, I'm killing me.
But,
You know,
Jake, these are real stories, and you're giving me this opportunity to share, and so I'm just so thankful because I think there is a lack of awareness, and I'm just grateful for the support because these are real kids living real life.
yeah, yeah. Talk to me, and we're gonna go back. I'm gonna circle back to the camp here, but I want to talk about one other thing that you mentioned to me. It was this little boy that had been out of school, and you got a call from one of the nurses that he needed some help. Would you be able to because again, I just want everybody to understand the full context of why it's so important what you guys are doing with the camp, and what you're doing with the foundation. But could you talk to me about that example of where you got that phone call from the nurse and how you kind of got involved?
So he was burned it would have been a year ago, November, and then he was out of the hospital in that January. So the following January, he came to camp in June. Everything seemed to be going well. I try or Jul it was August, but I try to have it right before school starts, because it's like that extra boost, right, of confidence. He came back for a post-op, like a burn clinic visit. I was traveling for work, so I didn't come, and the nurse practitioner called me and said she's really concerned about this boy. And so I said, "Okay, no problem, I'm gonna drive up," lives in Jacksonville, so I was like, "I'm gonna ask mom and go take him to lunch." So I took him to lunch, and I was just asking him, how things are going, and he said, "Everything's okay, but I just wanna go back to school." This was December of 2025, so over a year, from his injury. And I said, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "Well, I haven't been back to school." They passed him through the last part of his 5th grade year, but then when school started in August, his mom, who had been reaching out asking for medical transport and getting denied through the school system, so he had no way to get to school. He lives in a very bad neighborhood, and he would have to walk over a mile, and he's burned on the back of his legs, so he has trouble extending his legs, so he walks with a limp, and it's painful. And so, I couldn't believe it. And I just said, "I or we're gonna get you back in school." So I called and, the nurse practitioner, I explained to her what was happening, and together we contacted the school board, and he started school January 5th. And without that help that they needed, the mom was calling, but she was getting blown off. He's one kid in thousands. But the help that we were able to provide to get him back in school gives him the chance to maybe, one, not feel so isolated. I mean, he was
Sure.
so lonely. He was so broken. This little sweet boy who I mean, can you imagine a sixth grade boy begging you to go to school? I have two teenagers. That doesn't happen.
Yeah.
You know, and one of the last things, he said to me when I dropped him off that day, because I said, "You know what, buddy? I'm gonna make this happen." And he's like, "Miss Rebecca, why do you wanna do this? Like, why are you helping me?" I said, "Because I care about you and I love you." I said, "And it's not only me. I have a whole army of people that care about you." And sometimes it's those little sparks of hope, that encourage these kids. And yeah, it's helping them in a way that no one else was there to help, but we had the opportunity to make a difference. And he is back in school. Now he's complaining about school.
Yeah, good, good. Back
I just
that's actually I'd be worried if he wasn't, right? Like if he
right?
wasn't complaining, then we'd have bigger concerns. So,
But
you
but
know,
now he has medical transport picking him up. He doesn't have to walk through the bad neighborhood. He doesn't have to walk that long. So anyway, so it's a success story for sure.
no, it's so amazing. And so, now understanding more, just understanding all of the challenges that some of these kids are facing, I think it brings us back to the importance of what Embers of Hope Burn Camp is doing. Today, we don't have all the visuals that we had during your presentation with the kids tubing and swimming and fishing and just having an awesome summer like you'd want for any kid, right? But talk to us about the transition. So, one of these kids starts on day one, and I just love the stories about this. Day one, they start. What's the progression like from that first day to the day that they're leaving camp?
Oh, it is like a complete 180. So we have the means we actually make it as easy as possible for parents. Like I said, a lot of these kids come from low income. They can't drive their kid to camp. So we actually drive 2 different big buses to pick them up. So on the ride there, it is really dead quiet. These kids are like, oh my goodness. They'll talk to me, but they're like checking each other out. They're not saying too much, they're a little like, what is this going to be like? And so they get off the bus and we have all our, counselors there. Like they already know who they're paired up with. So immediately they're coming off. But, the kids are still like, okay, and I shared a story about, one kid that he showed up in a wheelchair because he had the same limp that the other little boy had. And everyone went into the lake, they were getting ready to have a good time, and this one particular boy, he's like, "Well, can you just wheel me down in the wheelchair?" And we're like, "Sure, no problem." So he and his counselor kinda sat on the side where everybody's having a lot of fun. That was about maybe lasted for about 30 minutes, and all of a sudden, Jaden, the other little boy, comes running across, and he's limping the same way that Caleb would because he can't extend his legs all the way. And he just saw him run across, and he was like, "You wanna go in the water?" to his counselor. And he's like, "Sure." And that kiddo, I mean, was on the tube. He must have went down the slide 1,000 times. That's a little bit of exaggeration, but honestly, like, nonstop.
I saw the picture.
And
This kid loved the slide.
oh, yeah. And not only the transformation that happens to these kids is so inspiring. But throughout camp, I will take a picture and send it to grandparent, who's ever taking care of the mom, dad, and I can't even tell you the joy that it brings them to see their kid acting like a kid. It just restores so much, not just for the kid, really for that entire family. And it is remarkable and it is such a joy to see. But yet I mean, you can't even get them on the bus the last day because 'cause they're too busy hugging and, laughing and, one more, "Let's just do one more thing," and then the entire way home not the about half the way home, depending on where these kiddos live, because some of them are all the way up at, in Georgia, so it's a long ride, but all they're doing is chitter-chatting about what an amazing time are and next year, and, so it is a night and day difference for these kids. And like I said, it's not just the kids, it extends to their entire family.
What are the kinds of things that you hear from the parents after the camp?
There's a lot of tearful conversations, them just they can't believe it. And they're just so grateful that there are people that care about what they're going through. And I think I have 2 children and I can't even as a survivor, I can't imagine what it's like to watch your kid go through those things. As I told a kid the other day who's 15, dad didn't have sedation. Dad's been here the whole time. So, when he's angry about it, just try to understand he's been watching you and loving you when you weren't even aware of what was happening, and the pain. He sat there by that. And so when they see their kid just having a good time and feeling connected and not covered up, oh my goodness, like when some of the parents, they're like, he is wearing that. We had this one little boy and he had a horrific injury, and lost his ear. He's burned on the side of his face. He is wearing like a little do-rag the entire time since his burn, to the school, to sports, to, anywhere and everywhere. He didn't wear it once after about an hour of being at camp.
Wow.
He had like he wears like a prosthetic ear plug in there, to kind of make sure that it's protected opening,
Sure.
but he just let it out for the whole world to see. And that wasn't just when we were at camp. When we went ziplining, he never put it back on after about the first half hour. And that just says a lot about what camp is for these kids. And when the mom saw a picture of him and he didn't have that on and he's sitting there like this with, like with his arms around 3 other kids, I mean, she was just so grateful. And
Yeah.
and So excited. Oh my goodness, my kid's coming back.
I think as a parent, like the last thing, the worst thing you could see is your kid in pain or suffering, and the thing that you want most is to see them happy and well, right? And so I think just that idea of like seeing them getting on the bus and not, just being, that hurting kid that's lonely and isolated, and then to see, I just can't even imagine seeing that picture, with the do-rag off and with his friends and embracing life. Man, that's such a powerful, image, so thank you for that, and I wanna get to what we're doing with Kidda, but before we do, I also recognize that a lot of this, these burn injuries, these fires, a lot of it can be prevented, right, with the right technology, the right standards, so if for the folks on this call, like, and I remember specifically from your presentation a couple years ago, one of the things that you mentioned was checking smoke detectors at your kid's friend's house before they went over. And so,
Yeah.
talk to us about how you think of fire safety now, and maybe just give us a little bit of practical advice that, we might consider in our own daily lives.
Sure, of course. I think, you guys are great people to talk to because I know you support fire protection, which is great.
Sure.
But honestly, before my injury, I never gave it a thought. As I shared at the conference a few years ago, we didn't have working smoke detectors. We certainly didn't craft a plan on how to get out of our home. I'm pretty sure we had smoke detectors, but there were no batteries in it. We probably took them out for the remote. I mean, just so I took safety for granted. I mean, I had no thought in the world that anything like this would ever happen to me. And so I think, I have a responsibility, and I think we all do, right, on this call because we know what it can do. But I think making sure that we have the protection in our own homes, that we're practicing using the technology. So checking that your smoke detectors work. And especially if you have kids, knowing a plan. If these kids know a plan, then when they are scared to death and they don't know what to do, they're going to remember that. So practice the plan, know the plan. Especially now we have these wired monitors, we have wired systems, fire sprinklers, which can actually put the fire out.
Right.
We just we have such limited time to get out of the house. And it's, I was doing a side by side burn in South Florida last month, and my kids' rooms are on this side of the house. My room is on the other side of the house. Those smoke alarms go off. I have not a lot of time to get out there and get my kiddos and think about babies. It's bad enough in when we have loss of property, that's heartbreaking too. I mean, I have no pictures of my growing up with all my high school friends. I lost all of those things in the fire. But if you have kids, you have a family, I think it's got to be paramount to make sure that we are practicing what we preach, making sure that we have working smoke detectors, practice a plan, because I know the difference when you don't.
Well, and I just want to point out for the folks that are on the call here, so many of them, in management or executive positions or owners of fire, either security and life safety companies or fire alarm companies specifically. I think that when we think about the real potential, right? We think about what could happen. It really makes us maybe think about how seriously we take notifications from a central station on a loss of supervision on a wireless smoke detector, a low battery signal. I could tell you, and this won't happen again, but I'm going to admit to it here. I had a smoke detector in the house that was the batteries were low and it was monitored, and my dad's alarm company monitors my house. So dad can always keep an eye on us and make sure the kids are safe. But I hadn't changed the battery in that smoke detector and it was continuing to report a low battery, and I'd taken it down because it was beeping and waking up the kids. And finally, dad's service manager threatened to send a technician to my house. I didn't threaten. She like offered to send a technician to the house to change the batteries in my smoke detectors. And I said, Sam, no, I've got it. I promise you. Please do not send a tech to the house. But I do think, in all seriousness, how important it is to not only in our own homes, but also in the thousands and hundreds of thousands. If we looked at, some of the folks on the call here and combined all the monitored accounts, there's literally hundreds of thousands of homes and businesses with monitored systems that, we have a responsibility to keep an eye on. And talking about the technology that we have, right? The products and the services that we provide that can make a real difference, can save lives, can save kids from, from some of these just terrible experiences and these injuries. I'm really excited to partner with Kidda Commercial. I'm sorry, I have to say, to strategically align myself, Jason's legal team had to make sure it was the right word. With Kidda Commercial, they have been so generous. After hearing your last presentation, Rebekah, at the Integration Association of Florida annual convention, I realized, hey, we need to do something to support Embers of Hope, and we're very excited to do so. As we discussed, we are going to donate 10% of gross profit on Kidda Commercial products sold this year, up to $10,000, to Embers of Hope. And I was so excited. And by the way, I just want to say everything looks so good and on track. Kid is really doing, really well with us. But I called Jason McKellips, and he's on the call. Jason, we're welcome to unmute yourself if you want, or not, but you're welcome to. I called Jason with Kidda Commercial. I said, Jason, here's what I want to do. Like I Patrick can vouch for it. This organization is legit. It's amazing what they're doing. It's so important, the work that they're doing. We're gonna donate, the $10,000. And Jason said basically like, hey, let me call you right back. And he calls me back, 20, 30 minutes later. He's like, Jake, I want to let you know, we're going to match the donation dollar for dollar. And so, Rebekah, we're so excited to support your organization. For those on the call, I know there's some folks on here that do use Kidda Commercial products today. I want to thank you for doing that, because you're supporting an organization that's doing such great work, supporting Embers of Hope. And aside from all of that, how cool is it that it's a product that literally saves lives and prevents injuries? You know what I mean? Like, it's so cool we get to be in this industry, and so fulfilling. So so Jason, I want to thank Kidda Commercial for that. If you haven't read it, check out the press release in the trade mags today. You'll see it there. Rebekah, I'm gonna drop a link.
Amazing.
Well, you're amazing. What you guys are doing is amazing. This is just a small way that, we can help support the amazing stuff that you're doing. I'm dropping a link as well into the chat here for Embers of Hope. Please, I encourage you to check it out. Follow the amazing work that Rebekah is doing. And it's not just, guys, it's not just the camp. When I talked to her and I heard about, her sitting in the hospital with these kids, being there with them and their families, going out and picking up groceries for kids that are eating on a I mean, it's just it's hard to even imagine how much these kids need our support. And Rebekah, I just want to thank you so much for I want to thank you. And guys, just if you'll join me in just continuing to support Embers of Hope. And so, Rebekah, I want to thank you again.
Thank you. It's unbelievable, and I just want you to know it makes such a difference. And it's blown away when you have a passion in your heart and you share it with someone, and the responses they want to support it too. That is something that's just it's really undescribable. And so I'm just thankful because really, yes, I'm helping people and I'm helping kiddos, but this has been a big part of my own recovery from my burn to be able to turn something that really was not great into something that is so wonderful. So, I mean, there's just there's no way to thank you guys enough. Thank you very, very much. I'm really blown away.
Thank you so much, Rebekah. Thank you guys all for being here. This call was recorded, and you'll have the recording afterwards to share as well. Kid, again, Jason, I want to thank you again for your support. We have this call every Friday at 11 a.m. You're always welcome here. If you have any questions about the Kidda Commercial for Kids program or Embers of Hope, feel free to just reply to the email that you got earlier here today. We'd love to get you some info on that. Rebekah, thank you again for being here and for the amazing work that you're doing. And I just wish all of you a great weekend. I'm pumped. I'm pumped, Rebekah. Like so much of what I do is incredibly boring and not fulfilling. This is I should admit that live on camera here, but it's true. This is something that I'm very excited about, and so thank you for the opportunity to work with you and support you, and God bless you and all that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And I would be remiss if I didn't say, while it may seem boring and you guys may not be, seeing what your passion for life safety is preventing, I just want to say thank you on behalf of, I know what happens when you guys aren't doing a good job and when you guys aren't in these homes. And so I'm just thankful for what you guys bring to create safe communities, homes, businesses for families. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Rebekah, and thanks everyone. Have a great weekend.